All right. Well, welcome everyone to InnovateWork's West Coast event. My name is Rob Catalano. We gave a couple of people some minutes here to get online. So I'm sure people will continue to be filtering in, but I'm loving some of the words I'm seeing on the screen here: inspired, purpose, feeling fierce. That's probably my favorite one I'm seeing right now. I appreciate everyone sharing how they're feeling today. So we are excited to have you join our West Coast Innovate Work virtual event. For many of you that have been part of the community for a while, you know we've been doing this quite often in different parts across the world. This is really a product or a spawn of a lot of things we used to do in person, getting together to really build the HR leadership community into a place where we can learn, be engaged, inspired, and really educate us on what wonderful leaders are doing in their respective workplaces or personally. So we're excited to have everyone here today. Seems like some people know each other already in the chat, which is awesome. So one thing we wanted to mention is, we're just going to give a couple of quick housekeeping tips before getting into our speakers today. So again, a big welcome. I think this is our kind of third event in this neck of the woods, but people are joining us from all over the globe, it seems. And that's kind of a good segue in terms of what's happening with our global community. As you can see with those little dots everywhere, we've taken what we used to do in one or two cities to bring together this community and have started to build into more of our online community. Sometimes we're seeing a lot of similar faces, but showing we're doing something right. But also, it's great to have new faces to continue to support each other as we try to leverage this type of community for really, again, inspiring us to be better. And today, my goal is really introduce the event. We're going to start off with this introduction, and then we're going to get into our HR Passion series. Basically, it's going to be 5 speakers spending 9 minutes sharing something that they are very, very passionate about. You might wonder why 9 minutes. A lot of people ask me, and basically it's that concept that, for most phones, especially if you have, an Apple device, your snooze button is 9 minutes. We thought about, well, think about pressing that snooze button and going back to sleep, or think about all the things you can learn and do in a 9-minute period. So we've made it really difficult for our speakers to come in and share their passion in only 9 minutes. But the idea is we can get some really good insights in a short period of time. It's not easy, and we're super appreciative of our speakers for providing their feedback today. We'll dive into that momentarily. And the last part is we'll actually, see, I love my snooze button. Last part, we'll get into question and answer. So we'll go through the 5 independent speakers, one after the other. They'll actually be introducing each other. Not that their job is hard enough. We're actually going to get them to introduce the next speakers. And then we'll get into more of a Q&A period where we will talk about all the questions being asked with all of the different panelists. So what I wanted to make sure people are aware of is, for this community, there's 2 ways we can interact today. One is in the chat. So if you have any issues, if you want to talk about how much you love your snooze button, if there's anything you want to communicate there, feel free to, and root our speakers on. However, if you do have questions, part of that Q&A session at the end, we want to make sure we're collecting them all in a different place that's easy to manage. Any questions you have, write them down, place them in there, and then we will address them at the end when we actually have the panel conversation. So we're excited for that. So I want to hand it over to my colleague, Bill. Bill, where are you? It's 10 p.m. somewhere in the UK. And I think you're still awake. Oh, you're still awake. And I want to share, and Bill and I co-founded this event many, many years ago, and still have a passion of continuing it, even though it's virtual, which has allowed us to extend globally. But Bill, I'll let you kind of connect on the last couple of items before we get started today.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Rob. I think you covered most things. Something I'd just like to add is thank you to the attendees for joining us and to our speakers. And we've got a couple more events coming up in the next month or so. So for anybody who wants to join us for our Midwest events, that's happening November 18th. And before that, we've got a Caribbean event happening on November 10th. In just a moment, I'm going to introduce our first speaker, but before I do that, I'd love for Lena to join us as well. Lena is one of our co-hosts of our West Coast edition.
Hi, everyone, and welcome. So excited for this event, and we're really looking forward to all the sessions from all the speakers. Bill and I will be hopping on at the end and firing questions at our panelist speakers. So look forward to speaking with you guys all afterwards.
We will. Thank you, Dia. We will. So after the 5 sessions that you're going to hear today, the Passion Series talks, Lena and I are going to come back on for around about 30 minutes and throw some pretty hard-hitting questions at our speakers. And we want you to get involved with that. So please do pop all of your questions in the Q&A section, and we will go through those and make sure that we make our speakers sweat a little bit today. And on that note, let's get straight into them. Our first speaker is the awesome Bobby Humes, Director of HR at the City of Seattle, and a recent HR Chat interviewee, actually. Please do check that out. That went live just last week. Bobby is an HR strategist and organizational change leader with extensive training and experience in HR project management, employee and labor relations, full cycle talent management, employee training, and leadership development. In his role, Bobby and his team support over 10,000 employees across 36 city departments in the greater Seattle area by providing HR products and services. Bobby, over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Bill. I got 9 minutes. I really do appreciate the introduction and the warm welcome here at InnovateWork West Coast. Let's go ahead and get started. I want to walk us through a conversation, a crucial conversation on why your DEI initiative is broken. So my aim is not to overwhelm anyone, but to position the context for a healthy, thriving DEI program while identifying some areas that limit success and therefore create more harm on staff of color and other historically marginalized groups. I am not an expert. I'm simply an eager, lifelong learner like many of you, an observer of data and patterns of human behavior. So let's jump in. And we'll start with our recent shared history around diversity, equity, and inclusion investments. Over the past 5 years, the number of executives with diversity and inclusion titles has more than doubled. An analysis of 60 million professionals found that approximately 2,250 roles with diversity or inclusivity in the titles existed in 2019. That's compared to just 876 in 2014. And until 2010, fewer than 500 companies had employees with D&I in their title. Over a third, that's 39%, of Fortune 500 companies have diversity executive with a title of director or higher as of Q1 this year. Now, I don't know if these are numbers that we can get excited about, but companies are making investments, and this is great, but we have to ask ourselves, to what end? And I'll dive deeper there soon. Let's talk about some more real numbers. Let's talk about making money moves. In 2019, US companies spent around $8 billion annually on diversity training. And DEI is big business. A 3-day facilitated DEI training session can cost up to $6,000 for a group of 50 employees. And more than $17 million has been paid to victims of settlements over a period of 20 years spanning from 1997 to 2017 related to sexual harassment, discrimination, and other workplace issues. So in a billion-dollar industry, I would assume we could expect more fruits of our labor. But let's talk about our impacts. In 2018, the Boston Consulting Group surveyed 16,500 employees worldwide to identify the most effective diversity and inclusion measures. Among Fortune 500 CEOs at the time of their publication, only 24, that's less than 5%, were women. Only 3 were Black, only 3 were openly gay, and just 1 identified as lesbian. Half of all diverse employees stated that they see bias as a part of their day-to-day experience in our workplaces. Half said that they don't believe that their companies have the right mechanisms in place to ensure that major decisions such as who receives promotions and stretch assignments are free from bias. So while we're making the investments, our impacts aren't making an impact. I believe that the reason why is in the framework of how we define D&I. So we talked about D&I. I'm going to give you a definition of DEI from the D5 Coalition. The word diversity can mean different things to different people. They've defined it broadly to encompass a mix of specific collection of people, taking into account their human difference, but focusing particularly on race and ethnic groups, LGBTQ populations, peoples with disabilities, and women. But to be clear, diversity can be defined in lots of different ways. I'm going to skip equity for now because many of our programs don't have equity included. Inclusion refers to the degree to which diverse individuals are able to fully participate in decision-making processes within organizations or groups. And while a truly inclusive group is necessarily diverse, a diverse group may or may not be fully inclusive. So equity. Equity, I believe, is missing from a lot of our programs, and it's key to DEI success or failure. Improving equity is to promote justice, impartiality, and fairness within the procedures, processes, and distribution of resources by institutions or systems. Tackling equity issues requires an understanding of the underlying root cause of outcome disparities within our society. So let's talk about it. Why DEI? Let's talk about healthcare. In the US, UK, and elsewhere, COVID-19 is hitting Black and other ethnic minority groups hardest, creating a renewed focus on racism in healthcare. If you're Black or Latino in the United States, you're almost twice as likely to die from COVID-19. Let's talk about housing. Housing inequality and segregation was a norm in the 20th century, even though the Fair Housing Act of 1968 sought to erase racial discrimination. Let's talk about education. Black students accounted for 18% of the country's pre-K enrollment, but made up 48% of preschoolers with multiple out-of-school suspensions. Let's talk about policing. A New York Times examination after the murder of George Floyd found that while Black people make up 19% of the Minneapolis population and 9% of its police, they were on the receiving end of 58% of the city's use of force incidents. And let's talk about criminal justice. Among sentences that allow for discretionary parole release, processes can be harder for people of color. Some research suggests that parole boards are influenced by an applicant's race in their decision-making, though more research is needed. Folks, there's a clear thread of historic racism where the people who are mostly impacted by the length of that thread live in our communities. They buy products from our organizations or services from our organizations. They work in our organizations. The bottom line is racism impacts everyone, but there is a clear path. There's a clear path to belonging. I want you to take away some practical steps here. We can listen to people and what their needs are, but we can't listen to people who aren't in the room. Can't listen to people who aren't in our organizations. We get to create feedback structures such as employee affinity groups to make listening real. We can measure, we can use exit surveys and employment engagement surveys, career growth and development metrics so that we can develop and act on what we measure, avoiding sanitizing our data because change is hard and uncomfortable. We can acknowledge what our data is telling us and create a clear path and do this with our diverse staff. We should never build anything for someone without them. We should expect that buy-in from our CEOs is more than just lip service, but focused on the work of understanding the impacts of systemic racism on the members of the employee family. And finally, celebrate. We can celebrate and learn from our mistakes. And don't forget to celebrate our wins, celebrate our staff, and celebrate the journey to truly becoming a diversity, equity, inclusion organization. So that's where I'll land. But it's my pleasure to introduce Kathy Enros. Kathy brings more than 20 years of global human resource experience in software, consulting, alcohol, beverage, and retail industries. With a strong focus on building a healthy corporate culture, Kathy has in-depth experience creating HR programs that enable colleagues to be amazing at what they do. Kathy believes at the heart of a great company is its employees and has built in-house recruitment and employer branding engines to ensure that only superstars are sought out. Kathy has had significant experience building companies organically through rapid global expansion plans with HR experience in Canada, the US, UK, France, Germany, Australia, Hong Kong, and Singapore. She is currently the Vice President of People for Vancouver-based Clue. Folks, please welcome Kathy Enros.
Wow, thank you, Bobby. That was amazing. You make me feel pretty important. And thank you for your great insights and statistics on diversity, equity, inclusion. I think that is giving us all a lot to think about. I am just obviously flipping topics, going to talk to everyone today about corporate giving programs during a pandemic and how I encourage everyone to rethink. They don't work the way they used to, how you can rethink them, and why they're important right now, especially, and just give you some examples of how we at Clue have handled it in the last few months, and maybe give you some ideas that you can take away with you to your companies, I hope. So let's get started. It's 9 minutes, I swear, hey? Okay, so everyone will remember, flashback to February, the good old days. This was easy. We could easily, everyone had a corporate giving program. It was an awesome way for us to give back. It was an incredible way for us to build our employer brands, to increase our employee engagement, piggyback on the fact that because you could get people together, you could actually do things like team building and have a lot of social interaction. But as we know, fast forward, the pandemic has hit and our mindsets have all changed. Everyone recognizes that last photo. This is how we're all interacting now. Our focus moved away completely from giving outside of our organization just to our own personal safety, the safety of our employees, the safety of our customers, our clients. And then, I noticed there's a lot of HR folks on the call today. It's, how are we going to help our company even function as a team, as we have meetings and are doing virtual conferences like this. And so corporate giving definitely, I think, took a back, we kind of forgot about it and weren't focused on it. But I think it became obvious to us the importance of it as this pandemic goes on, because things are not, as we know, they're not changing. This is the new normal. I think as well, it becomes a little bit more visible on the different people and charities, organizations that need our help even more during times like this. And of course, with all of the challenges around getting together and food handling, you name it, in-person interactions, we can't do it the way we used to do it. So interesting, as I was preparing for this presentation, Deloitte actually just a few weeks ago, and you can Google it, they released a study on consumer holiday shopping habits. But within that, I found a great data point where they surveyed Canadians. And while we are all not feeling very confident about our economy, Canadians are actually planning on increasing their charitable donations by 86%. That's massive. So something to really pay attention to. And that translates over to our employees, of course. The employees are looking to us as leaders. They are looking to companies on how are we going to step up during this crisis and help. They are looking at any actions companies take as compassion, understanding. So it's a really powerful and impactful thing to do right now. As we know, but more so than ever, it's going to increase employee engagement, your brand, and social connection and mental wellness. I can't understate this. By actually putting a corporate giving program in, or actually acting on it right now, it helps with the mental wellness of our employees in many ways. It gives them control, as I've said on the screen, in an area, in a time where we all don't have much control as to what's going on. This actually does give them control over how they're impacting and dealing with it. It gives them social connection. It gives them purpose, and it really will help with everyone's mental well-being. So, I think for those in just employee engagement alone, it's worth it to rethink your strategy and put something in place. I'm going to share with you a few quick things that we did as Clue to give back to the community. We raised, actually, just during COVID, we had a big Series A investment round close, and we wanted to thank our employees for getting us to where we got to today and for making Clue so successful. So we wanted to celebrate and send them a little gift. But we wanted to give back as well because we felt blessed and we felt like we're in a position to give back. And so we were very purposeful and thoughtful about what we wanted to send to our employees. Everyone's done gift boxes, but we really thought through the purpose and intent. We found organizations, including this company, that put the boxes together, and every single item in the box is from a very local company that is small, that has been negatively impacted by COVID. They're really worried about their their financial well-being. Is their company even going to still be around? They are usually very small individual or family-run companies. So that is what we filled the boxes with. We put an explanation in there. We did a little handout where it explained a little bit more about the company and how we've helped them directly from them. And the employees were just blown away. I've put one post that one of our salespeople put on LinkedIn, and you can see not only was she thankful for what we did for her, but the pride that she had in Clue and in the company. That employer brand goes a long, long way. Another thing that you can do that costs no money at all is we just, got a team together, virtual team, to do a virtual ride to defeat type 1 diabetes. This was a cause that meant a lot to one of our employees. So we all virtually got together. We raised a little bit of money as a team, and we did this virtual ride together, and we were all on Zoom and had a little bit of fun doing something that wasn't related to work at all. So that was a lot of fun. And you can again see the brand awareness that it created for us and the pride again with Clue. So anything can help. I've put some thoughts together as to other things you can do. It doesn't have to be monetary, depending on where you're at with respect to your own organization. Donate time to help others pivot. I've seen companies that have offered grants to help companies pivot during this time. One thing that we have done as Clue is we've actually helped others that have been perhaps furloughed find new roles. We've helped promote other organizations that need some help promoting. I've put some examples here that are local. There's a local restaurant, Fable, that clearly they did a good job because they put they've made an impact on me where they donated back to meals to frontline workers. And there, I just saw this on the news, there is a Vancouver food runners organization that you can just volunteer your time and get out there and take leftover food from restaurants and literally run it over with your car, bike, whatever, to charities that need it. Again, these things cost no money, but have major impact with your employees and organizations. So last slide, real quick, I think I'm running over. Take care of your employees first. I think it's really important before you do anything outside of your four walls, take care of your staff first. Make sure that they're okay, and then go ahead, relook at it, make sure it's meaningful to your employees, be flexible around it. We have an employee that delivers, that gets groceries and medication for seniors. We allow him to do it, at any time during the day. We're cool with that. So think about those things as you go through, and hopefully you can get something that's up and running that's really rewarding. So thank you. I'm sorry for going over. That is the end of that. I'm going to stop my share. And as I'm doing that, I am going to introduce everyone to the next speaker, who is Jackie Connelly. She is the Organizational Development and Employee Experience Leader here in Vancouver for BC Transit. Sorry, you're in Victoria, I think, on the island. You're the proud member of the People and Culture team at BC Transit in Victoria, where you are managing change through leading and supporting the development and delivery of people and culture strategies, frameworks, policies, and processes that support and empower people to do their best work. That's pretty empowering. I was kind of creeping you a bit on LinkedIn. Noticed too that you're an avid food photographer, which I thought was a really neat thing to know about Jackie and what she does when she's not helping other people be awesome. So over to you.
Thanks so much, Kathy. I appreciate that. Let's just make sure that this is all working. So thanks again, Kathy and InnovateWork for having me here. Yes, my name is Jackie Connelly and I work at BC Transit in Victoria, slightly north from Bobby in Seattle, south of those folks in Vancouver. And I'm gonna share with you today a a topic that I'm very passionate about, and I call it From Competition to Collaboration. So how women supporting women should be the norm rather than the exception. So Kathy stole the beginning of my presentation. For me, it all began with food photography. I lived in Vancouver for over a decade ago, and was a food photographer. I worked for restaurants. I had advertising clients, editorial clients. I taught workshops and mentored in the photography associations that existed at the time. And what became very obvious to me very early on was that I was one of 3 female food photographers in a male-dominated industry. So advertising was a large chunk of where we all found work. Small business was a part of that, editorial stock. Some of us made some of our revenue from stock. But what this really meant was that the percentage of men competing for jobs was greater, and therefore men just landed more jobs than women. The need to compete was preventing women from lifting each other up. We couldn't celebrate our gender. We were all starving and fighting so hard to get some of the work that was out there. And for me, I saw this cycle endlessly repeat itself. So that was my experience in being self-employed. And now I work for the public sector in Victoria. And these are some of the quotes that I heard then and I still hear now. There's not enough work for the both of us. We're not going to be friends. There's only room for one female leader at this organization, and I was here first. And I don't want to make light of any of those by that photo, but I chose that photo intentionally because this is how I feel when I hear these things, because I so strongly believe that it does not need to be this way. So let's quickly look at some research. So McKinsey and Company partnered with leanin.org. This is their 6th year of tracking progress of women in corporate America. And there's a lot of numbers on this slide, but what I draw your attention to is the progression that we see of white men from entry-level positions to C-suite and how that number increases. If we look at the opposite end of that spectrum, white women and women of color, those numbers decrease. White women, 29% hold entry-level jobs, moving down to 19% when we get up to the C-suite positions. For women in color, those numbers are even lower. Total women in 2020 that occupied entry-level positions was 47%, down to 21% when we move up to those positions. So I find these numbers hard to ignore. Women in the workforce in Canada is a research project that comes out of Catalyst, a nonprofit organization working with organizations and CEOs to build workplaces that work for women. So in 2019, they found that Canadian women represented nearly half of the labor force. So that's a 25% increase from what it was in 1976. That's great. Only 24% of TSX listed Canadian companies had a female CEO position, and just 27% women held board seats there. They also found that the gender pay gap was 89 cents. Women earned 89 cents for every dollar that a man earned. Bobby mentioned COVID and how that affects diversity and gender in our workplace, and it wouldn't be fair to not take that into consideration. So in just March and April in 2020 alone, 55.5% of women participated in Canada's labor force in April, dropping down 6% since February, so just 2 months. Women are now more likely than men to fall out of the workplace as a result of the pandemic, and we know this is for reasons such as women hold more entry-level roles, more responsibilities at home, childcare, etc. They also learned that women spend on average 3 hours and 44 minutes per day on unpaid work versus an average of 2 hours and 28 minutes for men. So the McKinsey and Company and leanin.org research consistently over the previous 6 years that they did that found that women and men leave their companies at comparable rates. Because of COVID, since COVID, 4 times of women over men are considering leaving the workforce. If women feel the need to leave the workforce, we will end up with far fewer women in current leadership positions and those on track to become future leaders. I only have 9 minutes with you, and I'm well over half that, but I want you to sit with that for just a second. Think about if the number of women that they are projecting that leaves the workforce, what would that mean for the diversity of our organizations moving forward? So what can you do literally today to help this? Connect with women in your industry and your workplace on your team. Whether you have a formal mentorship program or you just reach out virtually or otherwise to someone else, another woman on your team, that connection has power. Consider growing the table. So no longer does there need to be just one female seat at the table. If you're an employer, considering adding further support, mental health, paid leaves, remote work, addressing your diversity inclusion. These are all things that are within our power to make change. But I encourage you not to just listen to me. Hear from the women who support me in their own words. So I reached out to my entire team and told them I was doing this presentation and asked them to share some words that resonated with them when they think of women supporting women at work. And these are some of the words. So badass came up about a dozen times. Inclusive, history makers, empowering, trailblazers, supportive, generous. So that meant a lot to me. So in conclusion, women supporting women at work, I believe this is not simply a nice to have. I feel like it's a requirement. The actions that we take today will literally have consequences on women and gender equality in our workplace for decades to come. So thank you so much. Please reach out. I would love to connect with you and chat more about this topic. And I'd like to introduce Van Lee. She is the HR director at Lighthouse Labs, which is an organization, a tech education company focused on helping people learn about web development and data science. So I find that super, super interesting. Van has 13 years of experience in HR, change management, leadership. So she's gonna impose her knowledge, let us learn from her about analytics to upskill and reskill employees in the next 9 minutes. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Jackie. That was very kind of you, and amazing presentation so far. It's very clear that everybody is presenting on something that they're really passionate about. So hopefully I can do the same and tell you a little bit more about my personal story and what I'm going to cover. So as some of you may know, Lighthouse Labs is primarily a private career college where those who are seeking full-time programs want to reskill. Basically, this is the process of acquiring new skills to transition into a different profession. What some of you may not know is that we actually have a suite of part-time courses as well geared towards upskilling. So this is the same process, acquiring new skills, but for the same profession that you're currently doing. So why did I want to focus my talk on the subject of upskilling and why everybody should consider it? Well, especially HR. I wanted to first start with you sharing a picture from a book that I'm currently reading. So for some of you, you might recognize these children as adults. The person on the right is actually Roger Federer as a child, and the person on the left is Tiger Woods. And so this whole idea about early specialization is covered in a book by David Epstein called Range. And he makes the question for whether or not people who specialize early on actually end up being more successful in the long term. And the answer is, it actually depends. So what most people don't know about Roger Federer is, unlike Tiger Woods, although he was a precocious child, he actually tried his hand at over a dozen sports before he eventually landed on tennis. And the reason why this is important is going to come up a little bit later as I share my own personal story. And I'm sure a few of you will be able to relate based on how your tracks in HR have evolved as well. So how many of you relate to the reality of what a career path looks like in HR, particularly the bottom? I know for me personally, I've definitely experienced that. So whether it's you started off in people management, loved coaching and training so much that you decided to delve deeper into HR. Maybe a few of you were working in sales prior to this, landed at a recruitment agency, and then really got that rush when you were helping to match candidates with employers. For me, I am actually a finance grad who spent 8 years working as a frontline crisis worker in Vancouver. And I wanted to really combine my economic literacy with the emotional agility that I acquired working in human services. And so if these stories are so common across so many of us, why does the successful roadmap for HR still look like this? Well, the reason for that is because we actually tend to forget very quickly how valuable our initial sampling period is. What ends up happening is the greater we get to this kind of interest, capability, match quality, the greater the idea of fit ends up looking like grit. And so the reason why we become complacent moving up this ladder is because, you know, the titles, the salaries, the scope of influence are all great. The problem with this model is the landscape that we're traversing in terms of a labor market is actually changing quite a bit. And it's changing because of automation and complexity. So specialized functions like payroll, resume screening, even training and development are actually becoming more and more eroded because of these types of technologies. And the fact of the matter is the learning and the work environment we're in is quite different. So this brings me to the second biggest takeaway from David Epstein's book, which is around wicked versus kind learning environments. So what does this mean? Well, to go back to his analogy of, say, chess or golf versus on the spectrum of complexity cancer research, there are some people who actually benefit very well from specializing very early because they operate in essentially a kind learning environment. What does that mean? Rules are apparent, patterns repeat, feedback is continuous, and there's a wealth of data. This is why, you know, IBM is able to automate chess playing and strategies so well. Contrast that with a wicked learning environment, which I'm sure if you've worked in HR, you've probably experienced every time you think you're going to roll out a compensation benchmark, and then people and their emotions and their reactions kind of get in the way. This is where rules aren't apparent. Patterns don't repeat. Feedback is not continuous, and previous or historical data doesn't actually always direct forecasting. And so this is not to say that these learning environments don't actually oscillate back and forth. You probably do find yourself working in different situations where both are apparent. And there's definitely a lot of middle ground. You know, self-driving cars is one example of that, where there's an element which is important for repetition, and then another element that's really important to consider human error. And so why is this important for HR people? Well, the fact of the matter is, like I said, we actually do find ourselves operating in both worlds. A lot of our work day to day can be very administrative and can be automated. But for those of us that choose to work directly with people, that X factor, that wicked learning environment will consistently be there. And so how do we allow ourselves to increase our range and proficiency, be able to process the data, gain the insights, and really utilize that to make better decisions? Well, this is essentially why HR should care about data, and particularly the idea of upskilling. Probably at this point in time, very few of you are going to consider changing careers, moving into, you know, becoming a controller, a marketeer, et cetera. But I'm sure many of you want to continue along that learning path and improve cross-functionally across different disciplines, either within your organizations or even within different industries. So I would say for HR to prepare to work and learn in wicked environments, we really do have to improve our data literacy. And so this essentially brings me to kind of my current analysis of the landscape we're in. This was a survey that was done by Deloitte across multiple industries, multiple sizes of HR leaders, basically asking them how prepared do they feel they are when it comes to being able to analyze, interpret, and provide insights with metrics. As you can see, very few of them are above 50%. And this isn't great for us because, like I said, the landscape that we're working in is going to continue to evolve and be much more complex. And so for those of you that are interested in learning more about range, why generalists will triumph in a world of specialization, you can read this book by David Epstein, where he covers more of those things. But really, this is my last kind of pitch to you in terms of improving your own range. Many of us started out as generalists, doing the soup to nuts of HR, whether it was compensation, recruitment, training. And as we kind of continue along in our careers, like I said, we get very complacent and we forget that that we continue and should continue to actually be what I call specialized generalists. So continuing along that path to learn more and more within our own profession. So thank you very much, everybody, for listening to what I'm passionate about, upskilling and reskilling. And this is what I like to call the plug zone, because the marketing team at Lighthouse I would be remiss if I didn't include the fact that we've actually partnered with CPHR to introduce our own Data Analytics 101 course. So there's more information on our website about that, but essentially it's geared towards HR people. You'll learn practical skills like Excel and Tableau, and you'll actually be able to bring back to your organizations a specific business problem that you work on as part of our capstone project for there. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and then introduce our next speaker. So our next speaker is Matt Burns. Matt is a serial entrepreneur. He's an HR consultant and podcaster. He actually speaks 4 different languages and has been blending technology as well as data with people programs across multiple countries and industries, including not-for-profit, finance, and the retail space. Thank you very much, Matt. Over to you.
Matt, you're muted.
I do enough of these, Bobby. They think I figured that out by now, right? But no, it's still trying to struggle with that. Hello, everyone. How are y'all doing today? Great to be here and great to be with a group of speakers that, frankly, wow, I took away a ton already from the conversation. I'm looking forward to getting into a topic that Van just touched on that I'm particularly passionate about, which is this topic of converting analytics into actions. And want to go through a bit about how that looks for me and how that's looked in my career. And I think Van's absolutely correct. This is an area where, as generalists, we can step outside of our comfort zone and be more specialized, particularly in using other tools like analytics to complement our practices. And while the technical skills around analytics are really important, one thing I've learned in leading and architecting and implementing analytics strategies across global organizations is that while the technical skills are critical, ultimately it's human psychology, behavioral psychology that makes the difference between success and programs that lag. And to illustrate this, I want to share a story from an organization that I worked for about 5 years ago. And in that case, I was tasked with overseeing an analytics strategy that affected 96,000 employees. So as you can imagine, there were millions of unique data points, lots of segmentation, and a team of about 4 people, including myself, that was responsible for aggregating, consolidating, and ultimately visualizing data for an organization of, as I mentioned, 96,000 people. And when I first took over the role, I was really excited. I had a lot of dreams in terms of if I can get my arms wrapped around this data set, think of all the amazing things that we could do for the business. And I had a particular passion on predictive analytics, which for those of you who don't know, is the practice of taking lagging data measures and then projecting into the future so that we can become fire prevention as opposed to fire fighting. So when I began this role and took over these data sets, I sat down with a team and said, guys, let's talk a bit about how we want to show up as a team and the role that we want to play going forward to complement our stakeholders. And we agreed that we wanted to provide clear insights, very active visuals, but ultimately the measure of our success would be is what people actually did with the information. Because dashboarding and reporting, that's a passive form of analytics. Can we actually get to the place where we take action? So we set about building reports that were customized by a stakeholder that gave them the information that we thought they needed at the time to be able to drive their business forward. And we spent the better part of 3 weeks re-architecting and repackaging. And then at the last week of the first month in the role, we sent out these reports to upwards of about 100 unique stakeholders across business units, from the C-suite all the way down to line managers, and gave them a true sense of where their business units, how their impact was being felt at the individual, at the team, and ultimately the organizational level. And I was excited. We sent the report out at the end of business day on Thursday, and I was expecting Friday morning to come in and getting a whole bunch of, great job, Matt, and this is fantastic, and that we could start a new path forward leveraging analytics as part of our discipline. And ultimately, the emails started coming in. I worked in an organization that was based in Toronto. I, at the time, was based in Vancouver. It didn't take long, about 5:30 in the morning, when I got the first ping on my BlackBerry on my phone, just ding, ding, ding. And I lifted up my phone, looked at the message, looked at the preview, and the first thing that I saw wasn't congratulations, Matt, or thank you, Matt, or great job, Matt. It was, Matt, is this information right? Matt, is this information accurate? Is this the most recent report that you have? And over the course of the next several hours, I got message after message after message from stakeholders that ran the continuum of asking me questions about the accuracy, the legitimacy, the recency of the data. And in some cases, those messages were actually quite unprofessional, where I had people demand that I take the numbers down, that I rescind the numbers and issue a full apology to people. And I was confused. I didn't really know why we were getting these messages, but as you can appreciate, my cortisol was rising higher and higher and higher with each consecutive email that I was getting. And it didn't take too long before my mentor at the time sent me a note saying, Matt, I think you should come into the office and see me when you get in and just pop by and have a chat. So now I'm really anxious about what's going on. I'm asking myself, what did we miss? What did I miss? Oh, this was good intentions. And where did it all go wrong? And when we sat down, it didn't take long for me to realize that because of the nature of our organization and because of the tone that we had set previously around data, that data had been an accountability tool, that it had been a tool that organizations like ours had used to hold people accountable, but ultimately it was used as a stick. You know, if you were non-compliant, if you didn't hit your targets, if you didn't hit your metrics, there was a clear accountability attached to that. And so when we sent out reports, if it was evidence of people's non-compliance, evidence of people not conforming to the expectations, they took it very personally and they became ultimately very, very defensive. And the messages that I was getting reflected that. These are people who were very much trying to pass responsibility or avoid responsibility and looking to project some of the accountability that they were feeling onto my team, my organization, and really it just didn't fit. So when I sat down with this mentor, when we talked through the strategy, ultimately his recommendation was that I sit down with each of those stakeholders, and there was upwards of about 35 messages that I received, and better explain what our process was, what our methodology was, and ultimately how the data reporting and visualization was the first part of a two-step process that also involved action planning and coaching and consulting. And I had those conversations, did all those meetings, felt really good about having those chats, and felt like I had stakeholders that completely bought into what we were doing. And then the next month when we issued the report, I was expecting a different response, only I didn't get a different response. I had exactly the same response, many from the same stakeholders from the month prior, where, Matt, this information is not accurate. Matt, this information is not realistic. Matt, this information is not recent. And at this point, I was frustrated. I'd gone from a situation where I approached the situation with the best of intentions. I'd gotten the feedback. I'd met with these stakeholders one-on-one. We seemingly had alignment around our purpose and how we could move forward. And I sat down with my mentor again and said, okay, I'm just lost. We've had the conversations. We've done what we're supposed to do. I don't get why we're not having alignment. And his feedback was very similar. And he actually looked at me and said, Matt, like, for a very smart person, you don't seem to understand that this is their written record of showing that they care about the result. This is their attempt to show that they're taking the results seriously. And ultimately, in the culture that we've created in this organization, they need to do this so that people believe that they're engaged in their business. And it was at that time that I reconciled myself to the fact that this was going to be the way it was in this organization, and that I wasn't going to personally be able to change that. But ultimately, every month we would issue reports. I would get those inevitable 30 plus emails. I'd have to, firefight on the other side of that. But what frustrated me more than that, what frustrated me more than the tone we created, was the relationship that we developed with our stakeholders. It wasn't collaborative, it wasn't solution oriented, and we never actually graduated from the finger pointing exercise to action planning. We simply played politics. So when I left that organization and became a CHRO in another organization, I vowed to myself that when we created an analytics strategy, we would immediately remove all of the disciplinary implications from analytics, where I set an expectation organization-wide, whether you were the CEO or frontline manager, that there would never be a situation where we would use people metrics to be the inciter for discipline, where we would use them as a coaching tool, an opportunity for collaboration, where we could use them as an early indicator of opportunities, but that ultimately we need to take the information, sit down with the stakeholder, and co-design an action plan that meant to solve the root causes of the actual problems. And the results in doing that were completely different. So after we got past the initial resistance from our board, and I'll be honest, the board at the time looked at me and said, well, Matt, if we don't hold them accountable, then how do we actually expect them to do their job? And I asked them to give me some slack and said, just give me 3 months to try this methodology. If it doesn't work, if we don't see improvements on metrics, I'll introduce disciplinary action and corrective action into the process. But upfront, I want to try this as a more collaborative approach. And after the first month and the second month and the third month, I'm pleased to say that I didn't get anywhere near the number of emails that I received from the first organization. But the emails that I did receive were very much focused on, Matt, I'm looking to understand more where the information came from. Matt, I'm looking to provide some context to this data so that you understand more about why the result is the result. Or Matt, I have some ideas on how we could influence this number in a positive direction as we go forward. And that, of course, was music to my ears. I was finally meeting with stakeholders now to get to root cause problems, to have sustained results, and using the data in our organization as a teaching tool, as a coaching tool, which ultimately provided those leaders with sustained development, but addressed the root cause problems that we were so eager to solve for. And we weren't playing a proverbial game of KPI whack-a-mole, which was, at the time, my previous organization, quite frustrating. So it learned and it taught me that if you use data appropriately, yes, it's about hygiene, and yes, it's about having clear goals, and yes, it's about having the right tools, but very much your psychology and your philosophy around using data can mean the difference between partnership and competition. And in a partnership model, we will always get further faster when we do things together. So for those who are either administering analytics programs or have analytics even as part of your portfolio, I would strongly consider that you look at how you use data in your organization and whether that tool is used as a flashlight to illuminate opportunities in your organization or as a hammer to punish people. And ask yourself, what is the outcome you're trying to achieve? If the goal really is to realize sustained improvement over the long term, then you're best served to collaborate with your stakeholders, to partner with them on using the data as part of a broader action planning process, and to not create an adversarial environment where you're pointing fingers back and forth and ultimately never getting to those root cause problems. So with that said, I want you to consider that. If you have any questions, you guys can reach me anytime on LinkedIn. You see I'm very active on that platform. I want to again thank all of our speakers today. What an incredible group of speakers all the way through. And again, a big thanks to Bill, Lena, and Rob for a fantastic event today, guys. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you very much, Matt. And it's now that time when we throw some hard-hitting questions at all of our awesome speakers. Fantastic sessions today from everyone, so thank you very much. I was busily typing away here in the background, Lena. I don't know about you. I've got a fair few questions that we can ask of our speakers. Would you care to go first? And audience, please do submit your questions in the Q&A section, and we'll be sure to answer those as well. Lena, have you got one to kick off with?
Absolutely. And you were typing away, I was writing away. I'm still a notebook kind of person. So the first question goes out to Matt, actually. And, something you said really hit home for, many of the organizations that I work with in terms of using data as a form of discipline, or using those for KPIs. So for companies that are resistant to looking at using that data differently, what advice do you have for whether it's an HR manager, to the stakeholders, in terms of that shift of using that data?
It's a great question. I think, Lena, for me, what I've learned is that the fear of the change results in a belief that people won't be able to realize results on the other end of things. So what I've been able to do is now proactively say, we will have accountability in the numbers, but the accountability isn't based on the result. It's the integrity of the process. So in the consequence of, let's say, for example, engagement, I have no issue with including corrective action if someone's gaming a survey. That makes sense. That's an integrity issue, and we shouldn't be resistant to introduce corrective action. But if we're going to hold people accountable to results that they don't have complete control of, that's where it gets problematic. So I think it's negotiating with your stakeholders in advance on the confines of what constitutes an appropriate level of interaction around data. And the other thing I would say, Lena, is where we had situations where we had managers who weren't willing to participate in the action planning process, then we would also introduce a corrective action component to it, because if they were truly invested in the result, that's all we were looking for. When we stripped away the layers of it and said, if we want to see sustained improvement, let's focus on realizing sustained improvement. And if we have people who don't want to be part of that process, then is the time for us to look at taking different courses of action. But let's not lead with that. Let's lead with caring and coaching and support. And then if we need to go into our bag and grab out that hammer, we can do so, but as a last resort.
Great advice, Matt. Bill.
Yes, I have a question for Bobby. Hi, Bobby. Bobby's awesome. Bobby's also got a podcast, everybody, so you should totally check that out. Bobby, I'd love to hear a bit more from you in terms of creating that clear path to DEI. What are some of the metrics that HR pros need to pay attention to when they're developing that out?
Yeah, I think it's, thanks, Bill, for the question. And you can start with diversity, right? So each one of those elements, diversity, equity, inclusion, is a ladder to belonging. It's going to be impossible for me to have any data metrics around inclusion if I don't have equity processes that are focused on diversity. So what are we measuring in diversity? So we need to have a landscape about where representation is within our organization. I would start there first. And I would say that another thing that you can do, regardless of what community the staff member comes from, is tracking your exit survey data. It's very, very important. And then I would say another element is career progression. So I think a healthy organization is one that's developing people from the inside. And if you don't have data that tells that story, whether you're doing it effectively or not, I think that that's a problem. So that's where I'd start. I start with diversity. Who do we see in our organization? Second, I start with what is their experience? Exit surveys is a great way to capture their experience. And then I would think about career progression. Who's promoting in our organization? Where are opportunities coming from?
Awesome. Thank you very much. Lena, do you have another question that you'd like to ask someone?
I do, and I have one for Kathy. Kathy, love that your organization supports local, pay it forward. That's amazing. Maybe what are some of the tips that your company or your team has for rallying the team, getting people on board? I always say, when employees look at the corporation, lead by example. So what are some of the things that you do at your organization to rally the teams?
One of the, I find, more powerful things is actually having it be employee-led, rather than it be, I hate to use that term, but top down. Have it be employee-led, because then you know that it's something that they're passionate about. It's something that means a lot to them. And usually too, if it's an employee that is, out there and wanting to organize, they're probably a bit of a champion within your organization anyways. And people will look to them and follow. And so that for us has worked quite a bit. It goes a long, long way. So that's what I found worked well. To be honest, I think now, just because of where we are in the world, everyone in society, it's not hard to rally the troops. I think it's been welcomed, and people will automatically get on board that train. And so it's has not been hard, which to me is an indicator that it is really important for companies, if you can, to do it, because it will have a huge impact on your engagement. Hopefully that answers your question.
I absolutely agree. When it's an employee-led initiative, they feel more like part of a team. They feel more engaged. So I absolutely agree with that. Bill.
Yeah, thank you. I've got a question for Van. Hey, Van, how are you doing? So this is kind of an extension of that interview that you and I did on the HR Chat Show quite some time ago now. As someone who has made a career change, what advice would you give to folk who are a little bit scared of making a pivot, maybe developing new skills and entering into a completely different discipline?
Yes, I mean, I would say really looking at it from the lens of, you know, your life and probably your career is going to be one of the longest things you participate in. If we're lucky, it'll be long. So the studies around early specialization versus people who switched, you know, whether it was Yo-Yo Ma, who played numerous instruments before he landed on the cello, lends true to the fact that right out of the gates, those types of people who specialize are going to have an advantage. They're going to progress early on. They're going to make more money early on. But in the long term, people who have a kind of big breadth of experience end up making up that deficit, if not surpassing it. So one of the kind of surveys LinkedIn did with a lot of different CEOs was to try to figure out what commonalities they had once they picked an industry that actually led them to being the CEO of the company. And the single factor that was kind of cutting across most of them is the different types of roles they had held within that company. You see this in Google promoting its most recent CEO. You see it in a lot of the auto manufacturing companies, in the banks. And because you're able to kind of sample all of those different types of roles. Now, obviously, this is risky. This requires a lot of planning, and it does actually require you being honest with yourself about the things that you're willing to give up and sacrifice, because it will be time intensive. It'll be financially something that you know, takes up some of your resources. And so that's what I would say is, you know, once you make the decision to follow that interest, capability, quality match, talk to people who've done that type of work, sample it, and let yourself really know when you're ready to quit. That's the other piece too, is don't forget that this has to, you know, doesn't have to be an escalation of commitment. If you try something for 6 months or a year and you just don't like it or it doesn't work out, you're allowed to quit.
Awesome, thank you. I'd love to throw that open to our other speakers as well. 2020 is a year that, for all its horribleness, it has given people an opportunity to reevaluate what they want to do with their lives, right? I wonder if anyone's got a story they'd like to share about a former colleague, a peer that has made that leap this year, and what are some of the results?
Well, Bill, as you know, we just launched a virtual reality conference.
Yeah, right? Okay.
that wasn't on the 2020 roadmap in Q3, Q4 last year. I think you're right. I think for those of us who have the privilege and have the space and have the capacity to try different things and experiment different things, it's always been a passion of myself and my founders at Bento HR to kind of stay ahead of the trend. Last year, we were a digital transformation consultancy helping organizations move into technology. This year, organizations going forward did a lot of the work themselves out of necessity, out of time constraints. So now we have to look as an organization at where we want to be going forward and to build that bridge to the future. I think we all would agree right now, most of us are fatigued with this idea of 2D communication, 2D connection. So when we look for opportunities going forward, I see more hybrid workforces that include immersive technology like virtual reality. And for us, it's been developing that skill set. And I'll be honest with this group, the conference it wasn't a money-making endeavor. It was a giant focus group. It was an opportunity for us to try a new technology with 60 speakers, with close to 1,000 attendees, and see what would work in an environment of that size, which is a great microcosm for a lot of medium to large enterprises. And we learned a ton from that experience that we'll be able to apply going forward.
Thank you, Matt. Anybody else got any anecdotes they'd like to share about themselves or folks that they know who've, because of the circumstances thrown upon us all, have kind of pivoted and made a change?
I can share a story it's my sister actually, and she was forced to make a decision. So I don't know how relevant it is, but it's been amazing actually to see some bright lights during COVID, in that she was laid off in working for an events industry employer, so was laid off, and good on her, took it upon herself to actually search out her dream job, and she got it. And so it was that adversity actually that pushed her out of her comfort zone, and now she's got her dream job. So it's been nice. It was hard at first. It was an interesting journey, but it's been nice to see the end result. and that maybe sometimes some positive things can come out of adversity or times like this.
That's awesome. That's the sort of news that we need in a year like this. Lena, do you have another question for one of our speakers?
I do. And Kimia actually stole my question I was going to ask Jackie. So I'll ask Jackie another question. You mentioned mentoring, like the stats that you shared with all of us, those are staggering. I was absolutely blown away by those stats. You had talked about mentorship and, the importance of that. What advice do you have for people, young and old? I have mentors, and what advice do you have? And what types of research, or what should they be looking for when they're looking for a mentor?
That's a great question. Thanks, Lena. I think I mentioned this in my presentation too. Don't get hung up on you need to find a formal mentorship program, be it at your work or an organization. It literally can be reaching out to someone that you admire, be them older or younger, and offering to take them for a virtual coffee. It doesn't need to be this big production. It can literally be conversation, and amazing things will come from that conversation. Our CEO last year presented just to a small group in our organization, and I won't forget, she talked about having her own personal board of directors, and that's always stuck with me because I thought, just, hey, like, what a cool way to look at it. You don't need to have one person that you go to for all of your questions or advice. You can have multiple people. She even said that some people don't know that they're on her personal board of directors. She just meets with them every once in a while, asks advice, shares stories. And so I think it's just, what advice would I have is meet people, network, things like this. I mean, I look at even just the LinkedIn activity that has been created from this event. And like, I can't wait to listen to Bobby's podcast, and I hope to chat with Matt soon. And I want to learn more about, Van's data analytics and Kathy's corporate giving program. So it's just like meeting people, sharing what you can, and learning. It doesn't need to be this formal program.
That's great information. And I think, some of the people that I know that are in my network, they think that a mentor should be somebody older. And I completely agree. I have a mentor that is like 15 years younger, and I learned so much. So that's great information to share. Bill.
Yeah, I've got a quick question for Kathy, actually. Kathy, in your presentation, you mentioned that Clue had also helped some of their employees find new roles. I mean, there are lots of people out there right now who've been furloughed, perhaps have been laid off, right? So I wonder if you could maybe share some of that experience with the audience today in terms of the conversations that you have with these employees and steps that HR departments can take to help employees find new positions.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. And my bad. I should have been more clear. Clue has been lucky. We have not had to furlough. We're actually growing. We're doubling in size. However, a lot of our clients have had to furlough. And so that's where we actually stepped in as an employer and helped our clients' employees find new roles. The clients were really quite open about it. So their HR teams were open with us and just actively reached out and said, hey, we want to help our employees network. And so I would say, if you're in that position, don't be afraid to reach out and just ask for help and network. And so we love our clients, and we want to do anything we can to help them. And so then we started networking ourselves for their furloughed employees. Our employees were feeling so proud just that they were able to help somebody else. The clients were happy because, they were hopefully helping a former employee get new employment, and the new the employee that was furloughed, who knows, maybe they will be another client of ours, right, when they land their new job. So it's like a total win-win. And so I would say, just reach out to as many folks as you can within your own network, and, ask for help, ask for networking, much like we've all been talking about here. Just share, and you'd be surprised about how many people are willing to help without a question. I think that's just assume that will happen. Yeah. The world is good.
Awesome, thank you. Lena, do you have another question?
I have one for Van. Van, you talked earlier about career paths, and I myself have many. I didn't stay on the same career path, and now right now with COVID and many organizations downsizing, and unfortunately people having to, being laid off or leaving their jobs. In terms of reskilling or upskilling for Lighthouse Labs, is there an average age? And I don't mean to be ageist, but whether you're young or old, they're still losing their jobs or being laid off. What would you say are you the average age? Are there more young people than older people, or is it about the same all the way around?
Yeah, thanks very much, Lena, for the question. So it's interesting that you asked that, because I would say it's probably actually changed quite a bit for us over the last 7 months. So I'm actually a student that graduated into the financial recession. And so as one of my first jobs, I was part of the mass layoffs that happened at banks. So I think that factor really changed things for us. Prior to this year, I'd say the average age of our boot camp students, so that's the full-time reskilling, was probably around 25 or 26. So relatively young, which makes sense. A lot of people right out of university are either underemployed, unemployed, or really just looking to get into an industry that they feel has a little bit more security. Post-COVID, that is very, very different for us. We are seeing a lot of service workers or formerly service workers, because those jobs aren't necessarily coming back. Coming from hospitality, travel, tourism. The amount of employees we've actually gotten from oil and gas and the airlines in particular is actually overwhelming. And these are people who had good unionized jobs that had been there for 10 plus years. So they're now well into their 30s. And for a lot of them, maybe it wasn't necessarily their choice to do this, but they are recognizing that it's a time for opportunity to get themselves reskilled and pursue something with a little bit more stability. So I'd say that, just like for all of us, it was a bit of a wake-up call that sometimes you can't always plan when you're going to make life changes. But the fact that we've all adopted to this change so well. I mean, I don't know how many of you in your companies probably went remote in like 24 hours, but I know a lot of us did. And it's not something we were talking about prior to this. So that's the biggest thing I'd actually encourage people, regardless of your age. A lot of us think about learning a new skill as a young person's game, myself included. I am not that young anymore. But the journey that we've taken over the last year is just how much you can endure, whether it's basically only seeing people over video for the next however many months, whether it's learning interesting ways to prepare your food or get things sourced to you. We're all capable of so much, regardless of your experience and your age. So that's really what I would say is, this is sometimes the perfect time to really reflect on that and what is important to you. Like going back to my point about, this is probably the longest thing you're going to do. What 2020 has really given me is a lot of clarity around my values and where I want to spend my time.
Great. Bill.
Yeah, I'd like to throw a question there to everyone. So we're all working remotely at the moment. An hour ago, France went back into full lockdown. Things are getting crazy again. We're going to be working remotely for quite some time to come yet, right? I'd love to get your thoughts on how that's impacted company culture initiatives, ways to engage employees in meaningful ways over the last 7 or 8 months. And also, what will it look like when we do finally come out of all of this? Sometime, hopefully in 2021, when there's a vaccine readily available. Will company culture be changed forever? Do you think people will, choose to work from home much more? What are those initiatives that will still be able to engage employees in the same ways that we could do before COVID hit?
For us at the city, it's truly about wellness and well-being. Like my everyday concern when I wake up are how are those essential staff that are focused on running pipes under, our city streets, or making sure that our power lines are up and active, and what's the toll on them from just a well-being standpoint. And then culturally, how are they navigating the fact that their colleagues aren't coming to work, right? And so that we don't have this divide between those essential staff and those, those employees who oftentimes make more money, oftentimes that are more homogenous, have sort of this privilege. So we're really looking at ways that our messaging can endear us to togetherness in our function in providing services for the city. And then as we come back, we're asking ourselves the questions: who comes back and when and why? We were able to, in 9 months, leverage technology in ways that the public sector would never. We're talking about, 60% of our staff working from home. I'm sitting on one of those balls right now, and I'm working from home every day. And we're being our employee engagement survey saying that people are enjoying this. Our managers are saying in our data that employees are being more productive. So how do we leverage all of that? Make sure we have an us culture where we're teaming, and make sure that we have an infrastructure that allows us to continue to scale technology in new ways while we provide consistent service to the constituents of the city.
For the first time in my life, I'm going to argue with Bobby Humes. This is a monumentous occasion. So first off, I think Bobby's right. In context of engagement and empathy, it's spot on. And I love the fact that he's put both those two sentences intentionally into the sentence. Here's what's happening though in other organizations. So I have friends who work at Google, and I would say Google is probably at the leading edge of digital adoption, as well as being tooled. And Google as an organization has had tailwinds around revenue over the last 8 months. So there's an organization that's in an ideal circumstance in the context of what's happening. Now, they also measure employee sentiment probably better than any organization on the planet. And what they experienced in the first quarter of COVID-19 was a massive productivity increase. Like Bobby mentioned, they saw people putting in more hours, contributing more. But what they determined was that actually was artificial, that people were accelerating their efforts because they were afraid, because they were, in a lot of cases, kind of pushed to do more because there was a necessity to do more. And then by the second quarter, so by June of this year, productivity started to wane, and that their engineers in particular started to see productivity decreases as they hit a wall and realized they couldn't sustain the productivity increases from the first quarter into quarters 3 and quarters 4. So the challenges they've actually had are acute, and specifically acute with new employees that don't have the connectivity with their coworkers. They don't have those informal communication networks. And I think most of us can identify and recognize that a lot of communication in organizations, whether it's formal or informal, occurred in the water cooler. It occurred in the line for coffee. It occurred in the hallway or next to somebody's cubicle. And until organizations figure out a way to hack that and to do that in a way where people are more remote and rationalize that productivity can't just be based on sweat equity, but that people are dealing with issues that extend outside the workplace, we have to use tools more intentionally. So I'm actually concerned, Bill, to go into the fourth quarter. We're getting into a time of the year where mental health is an issue, where we have isolation is an issue, and we're dealing with a pandemic that's going through a second wave that might be worse than the first wave. So I get concerned about, are we looking after our employees? And what we've been doing at Bento is connecting with our colleagues and with our clients. We just care and concern calls, just checking in. How are people doing? How's it going? How can we support you? It's not a revenue play. It's just a care and concern play. And we're in a fortunate position to be a social enterprise where we're not motivated by bottom line revenue, but actually by helping people. So I think for the people on this call, it's asking yourselves, do you have the infrastructure in place for a hybrid world of work? I see a future in 2021, hopefully, where we're into a hybrid where people can choose between being in the office and being at home and going back and forth, but giving them the flexibility to do that. But then as HR professionals, we have to consider, do we have the infrastructure in place in the organization to support work with the same productivity, regardless of the modality? And I think that's the piece where as we move forward, we have to keep in mind that we need to have that infrastructure in place, whether it's technology, whether it's data, whether it's collaboration, to give people options, which ultimately creates a huge opportunity in organizations, but you have to be set up for success to do that. So I think that's the piece I would just caution, is that that short-term productivity increase may be a false positive, that you may run into other challenges, especially with people that are more extroverted and craving that connection, and ask what the impact is for things like innovation, long-term profitability, long-term productivity, that's where I get a little bit more concerned. And I think there's a solution to the problem, but we just have to be intentional about pairing the technology and the data with the solution.
Okay, thank you. Would anybody else like to add to this discussion?
What everyone said has been fantastic, and to be honest, I think I'll be completely transparent. Is that whole connectivity is something that I struggle with and don't have all the answers to, and I think none of us do because we have not been through this. And so, much like what was already been said, we've at CLU been focusing on things like support and flexibility, and that's worked so far, but it's ever evolving. Just to build on one of your other questions, Bill, one of the things that we've already started talking about, I don't know when we're going to be back in the office. We have opened up our office on a voluntary basis for those that need for mental wellness to get out of their small homes or away from, distractions and kids at home. And so that's there for them. We are actually planning on and redesigning our office so that it's, we are going to be in that hybrid model. Can't remember if that was Matt or Bobby that said that, where the office is actually going to be an office for social interaction purposes only. If you need to do individual work, you get to stay at home, and we're going to create a creative space when it's safe to do so that is going to be for team meetings, for creativity, for those one-on-one connections with others. And so I think everyone should be rethinking even what that return looks like, and we're planning on sort of just changing it completely as to what it has been in the past for those human connections, for exactly those things that Matt said. So something, food for thought.
I like that. So basically offices should become giant party rooms on the go forward, right? With disco balls.
Yeah.
Okay.
It'll
like
be
that.
much more collaborative intersection points, I guess, rather than just for individual work is what our intent is. Yeah.
Okay, well, I think let's leave it there on that nice positive note. Leave people thinking about these new cool party rooms and whatnot. So before I hand back to the very handsome Rob Catalano, just a reminder, we've got more events coming up. We've got events happening, let's see, we've got Midwest November 18th, we've got the Caribbean November 10th. We've also got a Rockies event based out of Calgary happening on December 3rd. So just because you're on the West Coast doesn't mean that you can't join in, because we're all in this wonderful virtual world at the moment. So jump online and join in for sure. A huge thank you from me to all of our awesome speakers and to Lena as well for co-hosting the Q&A. Those were wonderful sessions. I learned a lot. For our attendees, this will be available to you in pretty quick order. We'll get this out to you in an email, so you can watch Matt Burns' beautiful face over and over again. And you can check out all the awesome content that's been delivered today. But I'd just like to sign off by saying thank you very much, and then to pass it back to Rob.
Hello. Well, everything that had to be said was already said. I have nothing really more to add other than a big thank you for the folks that are still on. Maybe a quick shout out to our speakers to appreciate the time, effort, and thoughts. It's not an easy task, again, to kind of get those thoughts put into a 9-minute period, but also to take random questions and answer them as well, so eloquently as you all did. I pages of notes of things I've learned, tidbits to take back to my organization or to inspire me personally. So hopefully everyone got that same level of insight as well. And that's the whole intention of this whole InnovateWork series. So with that being said, anyone on the East Coast, enjoy the rest of the evening. On the West Coast, get back to work. But a big thank you again to everyone that's involved. Have a good rest of the day. Take care.
I'll see you tomorrow.